Hey everyone, so different kind of video this time. Not a sponsored video, but I got actually sent some products from Constantia Organic Finishes. And they didn't ask for a video, they asked me to just try out their product and see what I think. And I thought, rather than sort of try it out and then tell people about it, I might actually go through the entire process on a YouTube video, and that way it can be as objective as possible because you can all see the process, see the results, and see how it turns out and sort of judge the product for yourself. I've never used it before. A couple of friends of mine have. I actually got the hookup from my friend Josh at GT Edgeworks. Go check him out. He also sent me a lot of the materials used in the special knife that I am using for this project. It's a gorgeous knife. It came out really well. It's made out of Vitoku 2 Takefu Special Steel. It's one of those modern engineered super steels, and it is tough. It is so tough. But the Vitoku 2 is what's in the center. Outside of that, it's actually clad in stainless, and you get this sort of sanmai effect because it is a sanmai construction, possibly gomai. I'm not entirely sure on that. It looks like there's a strip of nickel in it, but I can't tell for sure. Either way, it's a gorgeous steel, and it made a really nice knife that I'm quite proud of. However, he also sent me, in that same package, a nice big chunk of ambonia burl. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct, but I've always seen it used in other people's knives, and it is just simply breathtakingly stunning, and I've always wanted to actually use it, but ambonia burl is rare and hard to find and expensive when you can find it, and like you pay for getting wood that looks that good, basically. But I wanted to actually have it a little bit of Tasmania in there, so there's some Tasmanian hue and pine burl in the handle as well. So I figured what better knife that to test out these organic finishes with than something so stunning with this incredible wood that and steel that Josh sent me. So let's take a look and see what we're going to be working with. So really what they've sent me are 4 products which represent 4 different stages of a wood finishing process. We have China wood oil, or sometimes it's you probably know it as tongue oil. Some people call it China oil. We have red oil, and we have final cut, which is a sort of like a final buffing compound, a polishing compound. And they also sent a grain filler, which I will describe its use later. It's a handy thing to have though if you're trying to get a good shine on your work. So these finishes are sort of staged out if you want the full range. What they've sent me is basically a start to finish set of materials that they offer. For this particular project though, we won't be using all of them, just because this particular project doesn't need them, but I'll still show you what they actually do. First one is actually a pretty cool product. It looks like sort of talcum powder. It's really, really powdery. But what you do is you take this and the red oil, and you mix it together to form like a paste. You can rub that into wood, and it will, some grains are sort of loose in wood, and it will actually fill in those loose grains and allow you to sort of sand it smooth again. Now, I wouldn't recommend this for big voids in wood, but when you have like a open grain, it's often called. I'm trying to think of species like spotted poplar, for example, is an open grain wood. You can actually rub this paste in and it will fill those gaps, allowing you to have a smoother, more even finish. You have to let it dry obviously before you go using it. You can either air dry it or you can buff it dry, which is a technique some people like to use. You want to use a nice clean buffing wheel, because remember that buffing wheels spin at incredible speeds, and any particulates that are on there, maybe settled sawdust or something from that was airborne in your workshop, will be driven into your wood, and it will actually leave ugly dark marks in the wood. So if you're going to go the buffing route, make sure you keep your buffing wheels clean. So we're not going to be using this particular mix on the ambonia burl because it has actually been pre-sealed with resin. to make sure any voids are filled. On top of that, the next product is actually red oil. Red oil is something that very few companies offer. If you are a hardcore nerd into woodworking, you'll know what red oil is, but if you don't, red oil is when you have a sort of a wood that has either a dull grain that's not particularly high contrast, or if you have a nice wood, figured wood, that's aged and old and you want to bring that grain back because it's faded over time, red oil is a phenomenal way to pull that color out. I had thought about using it for the Ambonia burl, however, when I pre-sanded this handle, and I pre-sanded it up to 1200 grit, and we'll go into that in a second, I pre-sanded it 1200 grit and it came out stunning looking just from sanding with no oil on it whatsoever. So rather than try and bring out more figuring, I wanted to see just what that Ambonia burl could offer without actually having any sort of enhancement done to it other than the polishing that we're going to be doing. So I've actually got an example here of to show you what the red oil can do. One of my favorite woods to work with, just because it carves and cuts so beautifully, is Philippine rosewood. However, Philippine rosewood has, while it's a beautiful wood grain, it's very sort of simple and low detail, low contrast. But you can see here when I add red oil to it and rub it in, like really rub it in there, then you can see just how much detail gets pulled out of that wood grain. So if you are actually wanting to get as much detail out of your wood grain as possible, and giving a coat or two of red oil and allowing it to dry properly before going through the China wood oil or tung oil procedure, then that's absolutely something you can do, and it's something that is quite effective. So let's move on to the main event, because the main event is going to be China wood oil. Now, China wood oil is best applied with something called a dabber, although there are lots of different names for it. And you can make your own. Constantia Organic Finishes actually do sell them, I believe, but you can make them. You want to get a sort of like a absorbent lint-free cloth. Cotton's pretty good. It's not the most lint-free thing in the world, but if you get the right weave of cotton, it's alright. You just get 2 rags, fairly small rags, bundle one up, put it inside the other one, and create a little ball, and you can seal that off with a rubber band, and you've got yourself a dabber. So with that, we want to apply the first coat of China oil or tung oil. Now, you want to actually sand this to a minimum 600 grit. If you're going to go through all this work of layering oils and polishes on your work, you absolutely want to have it sanded smooth as you could possibly make it. Now, the first layer of tung oil or China wood oil that you want to actually apply is gonna have to be fairly generous because what happens is it's a very thin oil, and it has a sort of a capillary effect, much more so than other oils, and it will soak down into your wood grain. Now, it'll only do that if you actually really sort of pummel it with this stuff. Subsequent layers don't need to do this, because you're going to start seeing a polymerization where the surface starts getting slick and shiny. But that first layer, you want to be very, very generous. And this is why dabbers are really, really good, because not only do they give you a smooth surface to rub with that's even, but they also absorb a lot. So let it soak in that can of China wood oil, and then pull it out and really generously apply it all over the piece, and just sort of thickly put it on and let it sit there for a little while. Like really, you're going to see sort of drippiness and all that sort of thing. Don't worry about that now. Just put it on there and let it soak up. If you watch it under a light, you'll actually see the oil sucking into the wood. Different woods are going to suck it in at a different rate, but watch for it and it will happen. Once you have got had it on there and had a thick layer of it on there for probably 20 or 30 minutes, you can actually take a clean rag and wipe off the excess oil lightly. That way you'll prevent any sort of drip buildups or anything like that. Wipe that off, allowing a surface amount of the tung oil to stay there. and then you want to let it dry. Now, tung oil is notoriously slow to dry, but there are ways you can actually sort of speed up that process. I happen to live in a really cold environment. It's cold and humid, which is not good, ideal conditions for oils to dry. But what I do is I bring it inside and I put it on the mantelpiece above my fireplace. And that warm, dry air from the fire will actually allow something the size of a knife handle to dry overnight. It's very different if you're going to do something like hardwood floors, where there's a large surface area and a lot of oil. It's a very expensive finish for flooring, but when you're talking about that sort of volumes of China oil, it can take a month to fully dry and polymerize and harden. On a knife handle or a little box or something like that, if you have the right environment, you can break that down to a 24-hour period, or even a 12-hour period if you put it like right above a fireplace. You don't want to get it hot, you just want to keep it warm and dry, like really dry air. If you want to be super thorough, if you've got a slightly larger project, 3 days. Do that for 3 days per coat. Now, this first coat is the most important because it's setting the tone, it's filling in voids, it's polymerizing and soaking into the wood and creating that initial bond upon which you will stick further layers. One trick to make sure that you are getting your coats even and they are drying evenly is to take the pad of your finger and run it against the grain. So not dragging but pushing with your fingertip along the surface. If you are feeling friction, like it's grabbing the pad of your finger, it's not dry yet. If it just goes completely uninterrupted, then you did a good job. So in order to prepare it once it's dried for its next coat, because I would recommend at least 3 coats. We're going to do 3 on this knife. But once it has dried, the next day or whenever it is that you are finishing with it, you want to take some ultra fine steel wool, the finest steel wool you can possibly get, and you want to rub it down. And once you rub it, as you're rubbing it down, keep an eye on it, because if you start seeing like a white gummy build-up as you're wiping it with the fine steel wool, that oil is not dry enough. And you want to go through and repeat the process. However long you left it, leave it for that again in those environments. Like the warm fire or whatever you did. It's a really quick and easy way to see whether or not your tung oil has polymerized correctly. If that white gumminess starts building up, it's just not done yet. So do the entire thing with the fine steel wool, and it will buff and abrade the surface just enough in just the right way to prepare it for the next layer. Now be careful you're not leaving any little fiddly bits of steel wool on the surface when you do this. So once it's done, wipe the whole thing down with a clean, lint-free rag, and then apply the next coat. Now the next coat does not need to be anywhere near as generous. You're just lightly coating the entire thing, evenly lightly coating it with your dabber, and coat the entire thing, leave it to dry. Next day, pull it out, steel wool the surface, wipe it down, re-oil, and you do this for at least 3 layers, and you'll get that nice built-up coating, and you'll see that the figure of the grain pops out more and more each time that you do it, and it will look super duper glossy. While it's wet, tung oil is super glossy. It gives a really glassy look to it. If this is not desirable to you, don't stress, because it won't stay that way. The more coats you put on, the glossier it will get, but with 3, you can actually get quite a nice sort of satinish finish. Now once that's done, it's time to polish it. Now polishing finished, dried, polymerized tung oil is an art form. There's no sort of quick and easy way around it. Now, one thing I can absolutely recommend, if you were leaving it for a day per coat, triple it and leave the last coat to dry for that long before you go buffing it, because you really want that final surface to be as polymerized as possible. The longer you can leave it, the better. Obviously, if you're trying to rush out orders and things, you want to try and do it in as fast a time as possible, but really as much time as you can give it, give it. What they have actually sent me is a thing they call Final Cut, which is a polishing compound, sort of. It's very, very thin. It's kind of like a meringue, really. It's not like your standard polishing compound, like a wax-based compound. On my project, I will be using the wax-based compound as well, simply because I have brass fittings in there as well, and I very much doubt that a timber polishing finish is going to be able to achieve the level of polish that I need for this project. However, to bring out the wood grain, what I used for it was a lint-free microfiber cloth, and I scooped out a little bit from the container and wiped it onto the surface, giving it a nice even paste finish. I then took a buffing wheel on my rotary tool, a nice clean one, that free from particulates, and I buffed it in. Now, before I buffed it in, I rubbed it in with that microfiber cloth until it was no longer visible on the surface, in terms of, because when you first put it on, it's quite cakey. So I hand rubbed it in, and then did a light buffing with a buffing wheel on my rotary tool to give it that final shine. Once I was done with there, I then moved on and buffed the brass fittings with my white polishing compound from Weber Abrasives. This stuff is Japanese polishing compound. Phenomenal product. Cannot recommend it enough. So much better than like your sort of standard hardware store stuff. And it came up a treat. It really did. It looks great. The figuring of the wood is high in detail. I can see so much more of it, and I am very, very pleased with how it came out. Ultimately, it's a good set of products, really. The China wood oil brought out the grain spectacularly. It was very easy to apply, quite generous. Even the small canister, using the dabber method, allows you to use minimal of the product. And so one small canister goes a long way, which is really, really cool. Red oil is awesome and hard to come by in carpentry world, so the fact that they sell it is great. It just makes your wood choices a lot more dynamic if you want to pull some pretty figuring out of wood. So great product, really like that. Haven't tried the grain filler yet, but having the versatility of a powder-based grain filler, I've used grain fillers before. Like you can sometimes find them called sanding sealer, and they're usually a liquid base that you put in there. It takes ages to dry. It's a pain to do, but having a powder-based one that you can actually mix with an oil base, so much more versatile, because you can make up what you need and it will dry much faster, like much faster, which makes it better for somebody who does production line work like me. So very glad to have that. Haven't tried it for this demo, sorry, but I have high hopes for it, because I've used similar things before and it's so much handier when it's solid rather than a liquid. So liquids always take a long time to dry. So all up, really excited to use this on future projects, because they were very generous in how much they sent me. I used very little of it for this particular project. So will I be using it again? Definitely, yeah, without question. Hopefully you found this as objective as possible. I tried to make it as objective as possible. I'm super happy with how this came out. This knife has actually already been reserved by somebody that before I even put the handle on it. They wanted it, so unfortunately it's not available, but I have a little bit more of the Ambonia burl from Josh, and I have another blank of the Vitoku 2 steel, which I have yet to grind up. So another knife, similar design, will be being made, but I never make the same knife twice, so it will be different as well. And so with that, I will leave you be. Hopefully you head out and at least check out their website, which I will link here and also in the description below. They have other products as well as the ones that they sent me. Definitely worth a look. Australian company, and it's a good product. It's a good suite of products. I'm quite impressed as a timber nerd. I'm quite impressed. But if you like this content, be sure to check me out on Facebook and Instagram. I have an Etsy store. I am on Patreon, which you can support me through. I have quite a few patrons now, and they're all getting some sweet content. you can be among them. And all those links are in the description below. And I'll catch you guys on the next video. Bye.
It's definitely here, but it ain't so clear. And it's definitely there, but I just can't tell where. And I'm throwing it all away.